Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Shannon Register, and every week we bring you news and information you can use on your next real estate transaction. If you miss any of today's show, you can catch us online at HoustonRealEstateRadio.com. We're also on Facebook. I like to catch up with some of you guys over there on Facebook. And if you've got a real estate question, you're welcome to call in, but you can also tweet us your questions if you like to play over there on Twitter. It's hashtag HRER. This whole show today is about consumers and who represents them in the real estate transaction. The Texas Real Estate Commission recently revised the information about brokerage services, and I think that's where we should really start, because if you're entering into a real estate transaction with a real estate agent and anywhere in the state of Texas, you should be presented with this information. So I think that's where we'll start. I've got a couple of realtors from Register Real Estate Advisors visiting with me here in the studio today. I've got Chris Childress and Keith Hebert. You've heard from both of them before. They've both been on the show before. They do a great job weighing in on things. So, Keith, let's start with you. Let's talk about the information about brokerage services, which is a one-page sheet that the Texas Real Estate Commission has said that realtors, should always present to consumers on their first visit together.
Right. Consumers don't buy houses every day. Mm-hmm. And it can be very blurry, the number of people that are in the transaction. Yeah. So what this sheet does, and what a professional realtor is supposed to do, is present the information about broker services, which basically just tells consumers who represents who in the transaction. Mm-hmm. So is one way to identify a realtor is they'll be presenting this information about broker services to you at the first meeting. They should be. Yeah. Not all realtors and brokers are equal, but a professional realtor will help you determine who is who in the party. This is very important for you if you're just getting started and not very familiar with the real estate process. Yeah,
and it provides a place on the form for consumers to sign, saying that they've been presented with the form. And it's funny because I always have, and I still do have consumers who will say, "I'm not signing that. I'm not signing anything."
Right.
And it's always funny to me when they do that. And I always say, this is not contractual, and you don't have to sign it. And then I just make a note on it, that I presented it whatever day and time, and but the thing is, by presenting them with this, you're really making it very clear who represents them in the transaction, because the person who represents them is not always the person who gets paid.
That's correct. And, it clearly states, that we have dual agency here. We have people who represent buyers, people who represent sellers, and the intermediary, mm-hmm. where they could possibly represent both parties.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. So for just for the purposes of kind of explaining this little informational sheet to them, it explains, when you read through this, it will explain buyer representation, seller representation, and then the option to do intermediary, which is where one agent represents both sides.
Correct.
So this is a great thing that realtors give out to consumers, whether they're the consumers wanting to buy a house or sell a house. It's a great piece of information that they're given so that they can kind of figure out who is going to be representing them, and they need to know that information. They need to know whether their information is going to remain confidential or not. They need to know whether that agent is representing them or not.
Right.
And when you go to buy a home from a builder, you're working with someone who's being paid by the builder, and usually they're not a licensee. And so they're not going to be giving you this information. But if you reach out to a realtor first, you'll get the information that explains all of that to you.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, Chris, let's jump into buyers specifically.
Okay.
So working with buyers, obviously you would give them this first and talk to them about representing them.
Correct.
What is your feedback that you get from buyers when you talk to them about representing them?
Well, initially buyers are excited. They want to get out and look at houses. So they call you up and say, "Hey, I saw this house online," or wherever it is that they saw it, and they just want to get in there. So my feedback is, slow down a little bit, just right up front. Just make sure you have the information that you need. A professional real estate agent is going to provide you that first by giving you the IABS, or the information about brokerage services, mm-hmm. which of of course, discloses the different types of representation. And then as your buyer's agent, they're going to talk to you about what's called a buyer's representation agreement. It's kind of daunting a little bit to buyers up front because they don't really understand what it's all about. But it's basically a contract between you and the buyer's agent where you're hiring that agent to go to work for you. Now, the best part about that is that in most cases, the seller is the one who covers the fees for your services.
Right.
So, and then by signing that agreement or entering into that agreement, that authorizes that agent to disclose to you all the information that you need in order to make an intelligent decision.
And I think that there are some buyers who don't want to they don't want to sign a buyer's representation agreement because they don't want to commit to anything. They're afraid of making that commitment. But the problem is, if you're out looking at houses with a realtor and you're not committed to that realtor with a representation agreement, that realtor works for the seller.
Correct.
They don't work for you.
Yeah.
So you don't have representation. And as a buyer, you need representation. You need someone who's going to keep your information confidential. So many people I find, and I'm sure you see this a lot, Keith, a lot of people will call me because I listed the house and they want me to show them the house because I'm the listing agent.
Right.
And they don't understand I represent the seller. And when I'm in that house with them, everything they say to me, I'm taking back to my seller.
Right.
Right.
Everything. I have no confidentiality with them. None. But when they sign the representation agreement, now it's all confidential.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Now they have representation. Now they're going to get confidentiality. Now they're going to get services. They're going to get help. They're going to get comps to know if the house is priced right.
That's right.
There's a lot more that they're going to get. They're going to know how many days it's been on the market. All those things that I can't do, can't help them, can't tell them about when I don't represent them.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that there's information that we're just simply not allowed to share unless we have a representation agreement in place. And it's important information that they really need in order to make the right decision.
So when a buyer signs a representation agreement, in most cases, the seller will pay for them to have that representation.
Correct.
And so the buyer, there's no fees involved for the buyer normally.
Correct.
If the seller's going to pay the commission. And the buyer gets full representation. So why do you think people are so hesitant to sign that representation agreement?
I think, like you said, it's a little bit of the fear of the unknown. The fear of commitment, I think, is a piece of it, but I think it's a very small piece of it. I think it's really, I mean, it's a 4-page document that they've got to actually, sit down. So if somebody throws a 4-page document in front of you, people will be a little bit intimidated by that. I'm sorry, but I do think that the professional real estate agent is going to take time to explain it in layman's terms, so that the buyer would understand exactly what it means, because it's really not that intimidating. It's matter of fact, knowing what I know, I couldn't imagine, going out and shopping for a house without having that agreement in place.
Right, without having somebody on your side,
Absolutely.
on your team.
Absolutely.
Looking out for your best interest.
Yeah, I mean, who do you want representing you? Somebody who represents a seller, or someone who's representing you as a buyer?
Yeah,
Right.
and it's free. And it's free. Okay, we got to get over to sellers. Let's talk about sellers, Keith.
Okay, just the same with the buyer's rep agreement. When you're on the selling side, you're entering an agreement with that agent that they will list your home. They will really provide you with fiduciary commitment, and that all the material facts will be passed through, but any facts that could damage your position or basically damage your position is going to be held confidential. And so you represent the seller on that side, fully. Now, there are times when, like you said, a consumer will call the listing agent, ask to show the property, and you're exactly right. You do represent the seller at that point. And even then, you still have to present this information about broker services. It's a requirement from the Texas Real Estate Commission, which governs all realtors. And there are just things that you, as the seller's agent, cannot tell the buyer, cannot help them with, even though if they would sign the representation agreement, you could. Well, you could get yourself in legal hot water with your seller if you disclose too much to that buyer without a buyer's rep agreement. And if you do list the property and you have a buyer come about who wants to purchase the property, you can do an intermediary agreement. So yes, it's possible to do that. But again, it's in writing. So if you're out there looking at houses and you haven't signed anything or put anything in writing, to me, you're at risk. You're putting yourself at risk. Right. Yeah, really you're putting yourself and your money at risk. Yeah, because whatever you're doing, if you haven't signed anything, if you haven't signed information about brokerage services or a buyer's rep agreement,
you're just out there giving people your information and not knowing what they're going to do with it. And
a lazy agent who's is representing you could actually get you in some legal trouble if you don't have that agreement, because they may disclose things about the seller's house that they shouldn't, and that could land you back in court if you end up getting a big discount on that home because of what they told you, and you didn't represent them, you represented the seller.
Yeah. So I hear of people out there who are buying who go around to different agents and see the houses, and they just don't have representation. And I feel bad for them. They need representation.
Yeah, they do.
But and if you're buying from a builder, I think you need representation as well, because you have an unlicensed person handling the transaction on behalf of the seller.
Yeah, they're bound by their employment agreement with that builder, and not by any licensing requirements.
There's no representation there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great information. We're going to talk later in the show about the other people in the transaction and who they represent, and you might be surprised about who some of these people represent: the appraiser, the inspector, the title company. Everybody has somebody they're representing, and it may or may not be you. So find out more later in the show when we come back here on Houston Real Estate Radio. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.